Welcome back to Rick's Scale Model Fix and part 3 of Kinetic's 1/48 scale Pucara build. The wings have been left overnight, taped up with strips of Tamiya tape, and we just need to remove these now and clean the leading edges up. I've also added the engine nacelles to the respective wings, and the fit was reasonable. We've just got a little bit of work to do in just fairing these in slightly. There's nothing that literally is going to take a couple of minutes with a sanding stick once the glue's fully dry. Just remove this tape. It does leave residue. It has left some sticky marks on the plastic there, so you need to make sure that that's removed before the primer coat. And once we're ready for primer, it'll be taken down to the kitchen sink and given a wash. So just using the Flory Models sponge dual sander, we're just going to work those wing leading edges, just to remove any trace of the glue and to make everything neat and tidy. Now there is some detail on the wing tips, so we don't want to remove that. And then we'll just do the inboard side. And it's always better, I feel, to do the work at this point, as once the wing is added to the model, accessibility in these areas is quite difficult, so you can just do it now, and the work it's quite a simple task, just to give that a clean up. Just remember, if you remove any panel lines, just to go back over them with a scribing tool. So each wing has a fixed pylon with light in it, and these have been built up just two parts, and they'll fit in like so. At the back, it's worth mentioning, and a nice tip, that there's actually a flap hinge that's inserted in there. It shows it in the instructions to be sandwiched between the two pylon sides. You can actually fit it afterwards, which means once you're doing the painting and decaling stage of the build, if you fitted the pylon, you're going to have a flap hinge stuck out here that's going to be so easy to not break off. So by adding it, then you can add it just before the flaps once you've been handling the model, save any damage. I've identified which is which. They are handed, so they can be added once the wings attached to the aircraft, so that we can check that they are level and fitted in the correct position, as they do both fit in the same holes. So all we're going to do is just clean up round these at the front of the nacelle, and we're just again using the sponge section of the sander. We're just staying away from panel detail, and we're just going over very, very gently, just to blend them in, remove any rough edges. And this is where the sponge part of the sander comes in handy, because you'll not put a flat spot in the parts. So I think that's good enough until we get it in primer. And again, on the other side, just being careful that you don't catch any of the raised detail like I did on the fuselage and inadvertently sanded off a load of raised rivets. Be careful of that hinge for the cowling. So all in all, not a bad assembly. it's all ready to now go onto the model. As we looked at in the last video, the fit is more or less perfect once it's inserted into the fuselage aperture, and that's going to take minimal cleanup, and we're pretty much getting ready for primer. So we need to work out how much nose weight this aircraft's going to take. So when you're working out the sort of nose weight, it's ideal to think of where the centre of gravity is, which is going to be where usually the main undercarriage legs attach. As you can see, looking at that in profile, there's not a very long length of nose and a huge length of tail aft of the centre of gravity, and that just means we're going to put a fair bit of weight in the nose of the aircraft. So we'll have a look at that now. So I've managed to actually get some weight in the cockpit void inside the fuselage. It's took quite an amount to try and get it to sit nose heavy. When I weighed it last time, it was 45 grams. That wasn't quite enough, so it's probably more like 55 to 60. They're just fishing weights that have been held in place with blue tack, and we'll put some Tamiya tape over the top of those just to stop them breaking free once the model's completed. Just like so. And it's now time to add the wing plate, so the wing assembly. So we're just going to double check our weight just to make sure it does sit nose down just before we commit to glue. There is that open access hatch, that circular one there on the belly, so in theory we could try and squeeze some more weight in once the model was finished. So we've got our makeshift cocktail sticks landing gear, just small holes drilled in the locations of the landing gear legs, and we're just going to put it on the cutting mat, and it just make sure we push these in properly. And put it on the cutting mat and see if it stays in a nose down attitude, which it's just borderline, to be honest. So it might be worth just adding one bit more weight in there, a small one. And don't forget, we have got the ejector seats, cockpit and stuff to go in, so it'll probably be enough, but we'll just make sure. These are just smaller lead weights, so we'll just try and get those in. There's a void there actually, and we can try and squeeze that one into there. And that one into there. That's just a little bit more weight, just as far forward as we can get. And we're just going to do it on the finger and thumb, and that's definitely going nose down every time. Still achieve that nose down attitude. It's still very borderline on its wheels, so there we go, but we can fit some more of those weights in once the fuselage is together. So we'll set about attaching this wing, and then we just need to put some Tamiya liquid glue in there. We've got near perfect wing roots, we've just got a little bit of a step there, but nothing that's too taxing. Once, like we said, we tape those wings up. There we go. So we'll just concentrate on getting this bottom piece in. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some Tamiya glue along this joint. We're just going to let that, we're going to give it a little squeeze, and we're going to let it just dry off, because we don't want a bead of cement to come out and block the panel line. And then we're just going to bind this quite tightly now with a strip of Tamiya tape. And that just closes the gap up quite nicely. So we need to now deal with the wing roots. So they do close up. We've got a little bit of a gap on that one. Perhaps even a slight step for some reason. There we go. Let's close that. So we're going to use the old masking tape trick. So we get a long length of tape, and we go from one wingtip across to the other and just pull the gaps closed in the wing roots, making sure everything is aligned from there. And then we can just quickly, before the super glue hardens, just get in there with a sander just to tidy the wing roots up. And that's closed that wing root up. It was just being a little bit problematic, certainly within acceptable levels. Just get in there with the foam sander. It's always better to just treat that super glue before it dries rock hard, otherwise you've got no chance. And then we'll just clean that area, and we've got perfect wing root there. Certainly not one that's going to need anything more than a slight amount of Mr. Surfacer. And there we go, a couple of near perfect wing roots. So all we need to do now is get a bit of Tamiya plastic cement in there, and we're just going to tease those just to fill any gaps, and then we just need to put some Mr. Surfacer in there just to make the seam, hide any irregularities in the seam. So whilst I've got the Mr. Surfacer out, I'm just going to be looking around the model just to make sure, because that there's no gaps or ill-fitting seams that we need to take care of at this juncture. Just checking underneath, there's a bit of a gap just here, but again, a bit of Mr. Surfacer in there, that's all it's going to take. The other side's not too bad. That seems perfect. Then we have just a bit of Mr. Surfacer there as well. So with the Mr. Surfacer just in those wing roots, that'll be allowed to dry before being removed, just like we did with the tailplane, and then hopefully we can progress and get the airframe into primer. So we've just spent a good few minutes in the spray booth, and we've given the Pucara a good coat of MRP fine grey primer. That was thinned slightly with the Mr. Colour self-leveling thinners and sprayed on the entire airframe. So it's decided to go with the lighter primer shade because of the light nature of the top colours. So that concludes part 3 of Kinetic's 1/48 scale Pucara build. Join me for part 4 where we look at getting some camouflage colours on the airframe. So until next time, please look after yourselves, stay well and take care.